Hi, everybody, and welcome to the ADHD Eavesdrop, where you can be a butterfly on the wall and listen in on my conversations. In this episode, I'm joined by ADHD expert Dr. B to explore what it really means to thrive with ADHD brain. We talk about the myths that keep so many high-achieving adults from being recognized, why success doesn't rule out ADHD, and how understanding your brain can be far more powerful than simply managing symptoms. So happy to have you here, Dr. B. Tell me a little bit about yourself. I know that I was doing some reading on you, and I'm really excited to have you on the show. You have so much knowledge to share with us today.
So I'm a psychiatrist and a neuroscientist by training, and my career has pretty much circled around human brain and behavior in one form or fashion for a long time. And I've been working with people with ADHD for decades. First started here in North Carolina, where I live down the road from the University of North Carolina. And I had a practice here a long time ago, 15 years ago, and the university wasn't treating ADHD. So they started sending people to me, and I quickly realized I didn't have much training in ADHD at all as a psychiatrist. So I went and educated myself, went to a lot of conferences, learned a lot. And since then, that's really been one of my favorite groups of people to work with.
So, what were some of your ahas that you got as you dived into the ADHD world?
The biggest ahas for me, and this probably is a little from my neuroscientist orientation, is that I really see ADHD as a brain variant. And I talk about this in the book. And I know there's a history of why we call it a disorder, and there's some good reasons to frame it that way. But I find that having more of a strengths based approach and thinking about an ADHD brain as being different from other kinds of brains. And I like neurodivergence and the idea we have a lot of different kinds of brains, and that's what makes us stronger as a population. So I think that was a big aha to me, that it was, in my mind, less of a psychiatric disorder and more of a brain type. That was a big aha. Another big aha was just how much misinformation is out there. Very surprising to me even now, which is why I wrote a book, that there's just so much bad information. And some of the bad information is actually coming from my colleagues in medicine or mental health who just honestly don't know what they don't know. They're not trying to be harmful, but they honestly just don't know very much. And so sometimes they're the ones actually spreading the misinformation. So that's been a big aha to me as well.
So, you mentioned the book a couple of times. Give us the name.
Sure, it's ADHD in Professionals, Embracing Your Brain.
ADHD and professionals. So, as we were talking before we started recording, I was a professional with ADHD. So, I am very interested in hearing your take on some of that.
I think because ADHD has been so poorly understood, and it's really only recently we've started, I think, to get a little bit more understanding. Many people who are professionals, so people who did well in school, high functioning, high achieving, people very successful, people would look at them and say, "You can't have ADHD. You're too high functioning. You're too successful. You're too, this and this and this." And it was creating a lot of suffering, actually, because people were seeking help to understand what was going on and they were actually getting invalidated. So the book I really wanted to share is kind of a little bit of a choose your own adventure. You can kind of hop around. It's hopefully pretty ADHD friendly. You don't need to read it like from start to finish, but talk a little bit about the history of ADHD, but less from a academic lens, a little bit more from like my experience working in this space for so long. And then we talk about the strengths and challenges, because ADHD brains have a lot of strengths in the professional world. They also have a lot of challenges in the professional world. So the book is not an academic book. It's meant to really share stories of patients I've worked with, clients I've worked with. I've done over 40 interviews for the book of professionals with ADHD, so they've shared their own stories as well. And I really wanted to get at some of those myths and misperceptions, and to say, what are the strengths and what are the challenges? And how does that fit into our workplace today? So there's a chapter for people who have ADHD or work with people with ADHD, which most people do, since
Mhm.
it's probably 10% of the population. So there's a little bit in there. And then there's a chapter to kind of where to start to get help. If you feel like you might have ADHD, you don't know, you haven't really got the help you needed, or you're just curious, there's a chapter on that as well.
So I know that there's a lot of self-diagnosis going on these days. And like you said, a lot of it is based on some misinformation. What is some of that misinformation that's getting in our way?
Yeah, some of the misinformation I hear is that I can't pay attention, so I must have ADHD. So that's one. When in fact, attention difficulties can be created by many, many different things, including medical issues. So if anybody's listening out there, definitely recommend that you make sure you don't have a medical issue creating an attention issue. That's a big misperception I see. Also, I hear a lot of people, you are too high achieving to have ADHD. So you can't be a cardiologist, you can't be an attorney, you can't be a professor, you can't be a leader, you can't, all these things. Like, well, how you're obviously functioning well, so therefore you can't have a disorder, you can't have ADHD. That's a big one. The other one, a misperception, is that ADHD means stimulant medications like Ritalin and Adderall, which are one of many tools in the toolkit for ADHD and make sense for some people and don't make sense for others. So I hear people be very black and white about medicine, like medicines are all good or medicines are all bad. And they're really just a tool like any other tool. Gosh, so many misperceptions. I also get a lot of like, well, if I'm doing okay at work, I must be okay. So if I can get my to do list done or I can get my project turned in, then it's okay. When in fact, much of the struggle is actually at home. When people put all their mental energy into work and then they come home, that's actually where things may fall apart.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense to me because I would keep myself together as much as I could at work. And then when I get home, I'd be a mess.
Very common. And also, another myth is for people who do have a diagnosis who are taking medicine, they often don't know how to adjust those medicines over time, over the lifespan. So they'll be like, well, I took this since I was 15 and it's not working. Well, you probably need to make some adjustments, or maybe your medical conditions have changed, maybe your life has changed, maybe your needs have changed. And so it's really something more that you adjust over the lifespan. And a common thing I see is people were on short acting stimulants for a long time. Well, those wear off. So if you're taking them at work and then you come home just at the moment where the stimulant is wearing off and you have kids and you have a spouse and you got to get dinner, and I mean, things really can go off the rails. And there are ways that you can change that and make that time of day a lot better.
Absolutely. And I know that like medication was a big, it made a big difference in my life. But like you said, there's so many different things that talk a little bit about some of those alternatives besides the medication that you talk to your patients about.
Yeah, I mean, the first is really like understanding your brain and then figuring out, is there a way that you can adjust your environment to better suit your brain? So that's one thing. Some people can even change their jobs or change their careers in a way that's better for their brain. Other people can't. Some of the other tools I'm really excited about are some of the neurophysiological tools. So instead of just working on medicines and pills, looking at the electrophysiology or the electrical activity of your brain and using things like neurofeedback devices or other ways to train your brain to enter into a more attentive state. And one pretty simple thing that I've been experimenting with for myself and my patients has been binaural music. Some people really seem to respond well to music, and binaural music has rhythms underneath of the music which help entrain your brain into different ways of behavior. So I've been using that quite a bit. And there's a bunch of technology coming soon. We'll have their headphones that can measure your EEG or your brain waves.
No way.
There are glasses coming. Yeah, there are glasses that you can wear that will measure your brain waves. So there's a lot of things that aren't just pills that are coming. And then, of course, There are things like physical activity can be extremely helpful, especially for a restless or hyperactive type of ADHD. Physical activity can be extremely important. Sleep is a big one. A lot of people with ADHD have a shifted circadian rhythm. So they're a night owl and their body isn't really ready to go to sleep until 2 in the morning. So sometimes people can adjust their life to fit that, but many people can't. And there's some tips and tricks about how to shift your circadian rhythm, kind of like for somebody who has jet lag. It's basically the same thing. So managing your sleep can be extremely helpful as well.
Yeah, and you threw in there the exercise. And so when I retired, my first goal was to get healthy. I was not a healthy person. I was overweight. I was a stroke risk. It just things weren't great. And my psychiatrist had very nicely said, that sometimes maybe jobs are not as important as we think they are. And she was right. So I did retire. And the first thing I did was start swimming 3 times a week. And oh my gosh, what a difference that makes. When I'm not feeling regulated or having issues, the pool's where I wanna go.
I think if people are listening and getting moving isn't necessarily like go to the gym for an hour or run a marathon or, I mean, literally like standing up and moving around your room if you have to be in an office, you know, if your office is okay with you standing up during a meeting, if you can get on the floor and stretch for 15 minutes. I mean, any kind of motion is very helpful. And so for ADHD folks, a lot of times there's guilt and shame about, oh, well, if I could just get to the gym, and they can't make it happen. And then they get very frustrated and very self critical. It's okay if you can't get to the gym. Can you stand up for 5 minutes? Can you stretch for 5 minutes? It's really okay. Like, it's just the idea of building movement into your daily life, and if you can get to the pool or get to the gym, that's like great. But if you can't, there's still things you can do.
Absolutely. And as a teacher, I used to recommend to other teachers who had students with ADHD to give them 2 desks so that they could move between the 2 desks during
Hmm.
the class
Interesting.
period. Just get up and move, and it made a huge difference for quite a few kids. And so, yeah, I'm definitely a big proponent on movement. And I also like to say, no matter whether you like the activity you're doing or not, movement gives you dopamine.
Yeah, and dopamine, finding other forms of things that you like, because we know with ADHD, you can actually hyper focus. So people with ADHD, when they are passionate about something, can actually focus better than other people. So finding ways to be creative and playful and be passionate, sometimes that'll bring out the
Sure.
best of the ADHD brain. And so finding what's right for you, everyone's a little different. That's the trick. But finding out what brings you into that state will make your brain feel really good.
Mhm. Absolutely. I noticed something else that you touched on, and I just wanna kinda pop back to it, and that's that whole idea of you're too smart or you're too successful to have ADHD. Do you think that, the spoon analogy that people use, like you have a certain number of spoons at the beginning of the day, and people with ADHD may have fewer spoons than your neurotypical. What do you think that sustained level of keeping yourself going and being productive and being high functioning, does that physically affect us?
I think the short answer is yes. And some people call that masking, right? So
Yeah.
I had one person I interviewed said, instead of high achieving, you should say high masking.
Yeah.
Some people call it that. Yeah, I think it does take a toll. But I guess the spoon analogy, I've always had mixed feelings about that one because I've always felt like, I believe if the ADHD brain were in a perfect environment that suited the ADHD brain perfectly, that they might have just as many spoons as somebody else.
Good
I've
lord.
never really, I guess I'm more of a strength based person. But having said that, most environments we can't perfectly shape to ADHD brains. So I do acknowledge that. But yeah, ADHD takes a toll on your body. And there is a lot of unfortunate literature showing that people with ADHD, especially untreated ADHD, have really worse health outcomes, probably because, the access to preventative care, difficulty navigating our healthcare system, which for anybody is extremely difficult and frustrating and getting more and more expensive. And when you're putting all your energy into work and holding it together, that's the last thing you're going to do. So unfortunately, we do see that when you don't take care of it, it can lead to a decreased lifespan, frankly, and a lot more chronic illness that's not treated. So it does have a big impact on your body. And even if you have a non ADHD brain and you're in a work environment that's extremely challenging and stressful on your brain, it does have a long term effect on your body.
Absolutely. So, in your book, you had several different sections, and you said you were inspired to write this book because of the misinformation. What are some of the things that you really prioritized as being like these are things that people really need to understand about ADHD and leadership and professions?
Love that you asked that question. I actually wasn't sure what to focus on. So I did a survey and I asked people, professionals with ADHD, what would you like to hear about? And most of them said they really wanted to hear about the strengths and the challenges. And they wanted to hear what does thriving with ADHD look like. They didn't want to hear about academics. They didn't want to hear about neuroscience. They said, maybe a little bit of neuroscience. So that's what I tried to focus on. And I used stories as much as possible because people really wanted the narrative form of how other people experience their ADHD brain. So it's a very story based focus on strengths, but also challenges and trying to get at the real lived experience rather than just kind of the academic.
Do you have a story that you could share from your book?
Yeah, sure. I have one story of a woman I worked with. She's anonymous in the book, but so one woman who was a clinician who loved her job. She had little kids at home and she was really struggling. She had actually been diagnosed with ADHD when she came to see me and had been started on a stimulant. And she was like, okay, that kind of helped. But she was still just struggling. And she's like, I don't know, something's not right. I'm melting down in the evenings and I feel like I'm a bad parent and I'm not succeeding in getting dinner on the table, and maybe I should just quit my job. But I love my job. My job brings me meaning. So the part I loved about her story was that the diagnosis and the medicine was just really the tip of the iceberg. So she got the diagnosis. We did adjust her medicine because she was having that thing I mentioned where it wears off when you come home. So we did make adjustments. But what I really loved about her story was it was really the coaching and the understanding of her life and some cultural pressure she was under to create these massive fancy dinners for these children who all wanted something different at night and kind of asking her the question of like, well, why do you need to create that dinner? And just to have some aha moments like, wait a minute, maybe I don't need to do this every night. Maybe I'm doing these things because the culture is telling me to do all these things as opposed to something that's important to me. And so I got to watch her rediscover things that she loved in her life and creative things she loved and ways to engage with her kids who had ADHD too. Engage with her kids in a different way and with her husband who had ADHD too. And to see the family do better and to see her thrive. And she's like, I'm so glad I didn't quit my job because I love my job and my job wasn't the problem at all. The job was just fine. It was just the rest of it. So I got to see her start to emerge as this more fully realized version of herself. And the diagnosis and the medicine were important, but they were really just the first step to the thriving. So I love that as a story of like, yes, medicine diagnosis are important, but thriving is more than just getting by day to day.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And as an ADHD coach, which is what I now do after my retirement, I couldn't agree with you more. It's finding those things that work for them and for us, and then, thriving in that environment. And there's nothing more exciting than seeing somebody figuring that out.
Yeah, and she's still working on it and hopefully she'll check back in with me as time goes on, but yes, like you said, as a coach, it just brings you so much joy to see people. You see those light bulb moments and just to see this glowing version of them emerge from
Absolutely.
somebody who's very successful, very high achieving, successful woman. Great kids, great, on the surface, everything looked great, but she just didn't feel right inside. And so it's always wonderful to see that.
Yeah. And I remember I felt that, like I was successful, I was a great mom, as everything, from the outside looked great, but on the inside, I was always like, "Why is this so much harder for me than everybody else? Oh my gosh, everybody else seems to be able to do this so much better than me." And I think when you speak to that as, when you talk about being in business, I think that happens a lot to people where they're like, "I'm working so much harder than everybody else." So, if you were to be able to address one issue with, I would say, I want to talk about time blindness because I have terrible time blindness. And it's a very big thing with people with ADHD. I know you've done some things with time blindness. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. It's funny you just said that because I'm looking at my time here and I know we're close to time
We're
here. So
getting
maybe we'll
close.
conclude. Yeah, maybe we'll wrap on this one. Yeah, so time blindness is fascinating. So there is literature that ADHD brains perceive time differently. And when you're in a hyper-focused state, time can just go by hours, 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 12 hours can go by. And when you're struggling, it can feel like each second is ticking like an hour. And there is actually this different sense of time. And I think that's really interesting. And one way to think about it, Tom Hartman's book on being a hunter in a farmer's world, he uses this analogy of like ADHD brains as being hunter brains. And when you're in the woods hunting, for the prey, you need to have this like intense noticing every little stimuli around you and have time kind of stand still.
Hmm.
And I think that's so interesting. But there is this difference in perception of time. And then people with non ADHD brains are much better at predicting, like, okay, I have to do this assignment. This is how long it's going to take me. Whereas when I work with ADHD clients, if it's something they enjoy, they typically think it's going to go really, really fast. And if it's something they hate, they think it's going to take way longer than it actually takes them.
Absolutely. And I'm one of these people who's like, okay, so I need to be here at this time. And I will have to literally think, how many minutes is it going to take me? Because I can't just say I can leave about a half hour before. I've got to literally figure out
Yeah. That's a
the,
great coping strategy, though, to like map it out and chunk the time. I
yeah.
definitely work with people like that. Yeah.
So, what do you love about your job, Dr. B?
So I think, what I love is I get to be a scientist, but I also get to be a healer and I also get to be a coach. I get to be somebody who thinks about the future and helps other people design clinical programs. So I kind of get to do a little bit of everything and I never get bored.
Sounds awesome. Well, I'm so glad you were able to join us today. I'm so happy that you came on. So much to share with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Sorry we had to cut it a little short, but I'm glad it worked and good luck with everything. Thank you.